Hey guys, this is Melissa with Love Covered Life, and today I'm going to tell you the story of my journey from Reformed fundamentalism to Christian Universalism. About a year and a half ago, I posted a video telling this story, and it is to date by far my most popular video on this channel. However, it was very poorly done. I had no idea what I was doing, not that I do now either. So you guys who subscribe to my channel are pretty evenly split. Some of you are here for the Christian Universalism videos and like the solid biblical discussion, and the rest of you are here because I'm open-minded and I talk about near-death experiences and A Course in Miracles. I'm a hardcore student of Joe Dispenza. I have Michael Newton's books. I've listened to all of Dolores Cannon's lectures. A little bit recently into the Law of One. Always been interested in Eastern philosophies. My story includes experiences within Christianity. I've been within the Christian religion my entire life, but it did not start there. My story started with the mystical, the unexplainable, the esoteric. And that's why I've always been open-minded towards these sort of things. My story started with a love that encompasses all religious barriers or any other box that we would try to confine it in. I was born with memories that are very difficult to describe, and I spent most of my lifetime trying to figure out what they were and what happened to them and how I could find them again. But one thing I haven't been able to do is figure out how to put these memories into words. The best that I can do is to say light, music, all-consuming love, eternal comfort and safety, infinite fiery sea of light, cosmic storm of pure brilliance, hurricane of light. It was light, guys, and the light was love. The kind of love that consumed your mind and your awareness. Every atom of this light was alive with love. And when you go into the light, you don't know if it's excitement or dread that you feel, because the level of bliss, you think it's going to destroy you, but instead it perfects you. I just don't know how to put it into words. That's like such a dim shadow of the actual experience. They taught me in the church that we are born dead into sin, with no knowledge of God, no desire to seek God, or ability to choose God. And I've hesitated to say this in Christian circles because I don't want to sound arrogant, but for myself, that just was not true. And I can lie all I want to sound more doctrinally correct or whatever, but it would be a lie. I knew God when I came here. We all do. Most of us just don't remember. But for some reason, I remembered God and I knew Him and I had a connection with Him and I heard His voice very clearly as a young child, and I lived in tune with that. I always have. I've always been very sincere about my faith, even when I was misled. The thing that I have always wanted more than anything else is to know God. That's what I wanted as a young child. It is what I have always wanted. And there's not much that I wouldn't give up for that. And it's because I do have these memories that drive everything that I do. And I felt a huge sense of loss as a young child and a lot of confusion because my connection was so dimmed compared to what I remembered, and in my human mind of a child, I did not understand. I didn't understand what I remembered. I didn't understand where it had gone or how to get it back. My dad was my light during my entire childhood, but during those early years, he taught me the names of God in Hebrew. The name that stood out the most to me was El Shaddai, which my dad taught me meant Almighty God, or God who is more than enough. And every time I heard that name, I thought, that's what I'm remembering. I know that God who's more than enough. Enough to satisfy every desire of the human heart. That's what I remembered, and that's what I knew. And that's what I wanted to find again. And every time I heard that name, El Shaddai, I'd have a flashback, an explosion of light and love and bliss and comfort and eternal safety out there somewhere beyond what my eyes could see. And I didn't understand it or where it had gone, but at least now I had a name for it. When I was 5, my family began attending a church with a vastly different atmosphere than anything I had been exposed to before. Up until that point, my spiritual diet had consisted of my dad's Hebrew lessons and the praise songs that we sang at the gospel church, where the pastor told borderline inappropriate jokes from the pulpit. In this new church, you didn't sing praise songs, and you definitely didn't tell irreverent jokes. You sat in the chair and listened to an hour-long sermon about how God hates sin and sinners. This church was a Reformed Baptist church, and it held to Calvinistic or Reformed theology. The basic premise of its theology is that God is in control of everything. The 5 points of Calvinism, or the 5 points of Reformed doctrine, can be summed up with the acronym TULIP. T stands for total depravity, which means that people are completely corrupt and unable to seek God on their own. U stands for unconditional election, that God chose before he created the world who would be saved and eventually go to heaven when they died, and that God also chose those who would not be saved and created them for the sole purpose of experiencing eternal torment in hell forever. This choice is not based on anything that we do or don't do. It was just simply based on what God wanted to choose. L stands for limited atonement, that Jesus only died for those that God chose, that he did not actually die for most of the world's population who would end up in hell. I stands for irresistible grace. Those whom God chooses, he calls, and they cannot resist the call. They will respond to God's call. And P stands for perseverance of the saints, which basically means once saved, always saved. You cannot be chosen, called, respond to God's call, and then fall away. Because how could an all-powerful, almighty God lose one of his? How could anyone mess up God's plan? So what this adds up to is that God planned every detail of everything ahead of time, and that everything that happens is God's will. God not only knew that we would fall into sin, he planned it. God not only knew that most of the world's population would reject him, he planned it. God not only knew that most of the world's population would spend eternity in hell, he planned it. And if anybody questioned the justice of this God, we were met with the response, he's God. He can do whatever he wants. We are all filthy, rotten sinners, deserving of eternal hellfire, and God's mercy and love is demonstrated in the fact that he stooped so low as to save any of us from our sin, which he in his infinite goodness and righteousness did not have to do. And therefore, those whom God chose who end up with him in heaven will spend eternity laughing at the torments of those in hell and rejoicing because of the perfection of God's justice. And I heard this from the pulpit multiple times, that those in heaven would actually watch the sufferings of their friends and loved ones and family members in hell, and they would rejoice that they had been saved. They would not feel any remorse for those suffering, because that would be unrighteous. God, I was taught, is powerful enough to save all people. And he could if he wanted to, but he doesn't want to, and he doesn't have to, because who are we to question his perfect justice? As you can imagine, these dark and twisted beliefs do a number on a child's developing psyche. From about the age of 5 on, I became severely depressed, developed severe social anxiety, all kinds of mental and emotional issues, and as a teenager, I became suicidal. I had a near suicide attempt somewhere between the ages of 17 and 19. I don't have any way of remembering exactly when that was now. I heard voices every night when I went to bed screaming in my ears that I was worthless, that the world would be better off without me. At the age of 19, as soon as I was legally an adult and felt that I could leave the church without dishonoring my parents or causing too much of a scene, I was out of there. I had a friend who attended a non-denominational charismatic church, and she told me stories of services where people were free to express themselves by raising their hands in worship, of miraculous physical healings that happened during services, and most importantly, a pastor who preached about a God of love. I visited the healing rooms first, where I actually experienced 2 miraculous healings. The first time I went, a group of people offered to pray for me, and as they prayed for me, they received a word of knowledge that I had a weak and painful lower back, which was true. They then laid their hands on my back and prayed for my healing, and I was miraculously healed. It didn't take me long to figure out that if I could be healed of lower back pain, I could also be healed of my depression. So I went back a second time, received healing prayer for my depression, and I woke up the morning after the healing prayer occurred, and I was completely healed of my depression. It didn't return for 10 years, and I'll get more into that in my next video. So after all of these years, me, who I was at the core of my being, had not changed. I was still voraciously hungry for God, and I felt that I had found some semblance of Him at this church. So I was there every time the doors were open, multiple times a week. So this new church held to Arminian Doctrine, which basically refutes the 5 points of Calvinism. Arminianism teaches that we are not totally depraved. We are born into sin, but we have the ability to choose God. And in fact, this is the choice that each one of us are faced with in this lifetime. Arminianism teaches that God foreknew who would choose Him, but that He did not make this choice Himself, that God actually wants all of us to be saved. However, God is not in control. He cannot violate our free will. So God doesn't always get what He wants. Arminianism teaches that Jesus died for all, but that not all will respond to Him, that people can and do resist God's grace, and that it is possible for someone who is saved to fall away from salvation. To sum it up, God is not in control of and does not want any of the bad things that happen in the world. Those things are caused by the devil or by us. But God cannot violate our free will. Ultimately, if we choose to reject Him, there's nothing that He can do about it. Compared to where I had come from, these teachings were a salve to my tormented mind. And I healed and progressed so rapidly under this Arminian teaching, this teaching that compromised God's power to emphasize His love, that taught that God actually wants to save and heal and deliver everyone. I changed so much under this teaching that my entire family actually left the Calvinistic church that I had been raised in and came to my new church with me, and my entire family ended up finding healing together, and it was one of the most beautiful experiences of my life. And it just goes to show that different people at different points on their path need different things, and that God can and does use all religious teachings to help the people that they are designed and best suited for. I attended this church for 4 years, and like I said, it was my entire center. Everything about my life revolved around the physical location of this church, because that's where I had experienced the one thing that I wanted more than anything: God. This church was what I lived for 4 years. And then I met my husband, and he was pretty much the only thing that could have taken me away from that church. We ended up moving across country to a little city in the big, empty, wild West, where choices for churches were slim. Apologies to anyone watching this who attends a church in my area, but I just cannot find anything here to recreate the experiences that I had had at my previous church. And so I floundered spiritually. My husband and I struggled in our marriage, and he is okay with me sharing all of this. The worst parts of both of us came out, and it became very clear very quickly that neither one of us were as spiritually mature as we thought we were. We spent the next several years, almost 10 years, fighting our way through a lot of darkness, both internally, relationally, financially. This was, aside from the time that I was suicidal in my teenage years, the darkest time of my life, and the only time that I've ever shut down my connection to God. I was so disillusioned and disappointed after years of religious abuse at the first church, and then chasing supernatural experiences for a temporary fulfillment, to then just be left empty again at the second church. Then, one night, as I was lying on the couch, pregnant with morning sickness, in the apartment that we had just learned we were going to be evicted from. The fridge empty, my husband in the next room with his leg shattered. I decided I was going to do something that I had been avoiding for years because of the fear of the New Age deception that had been drilled into my brain from my religious upbringing. I decided that I was going to read near-death experience stories. I was desperate. I had lost my connection with God, and I was losing everything except for my husband and kids for the second time in 3 years. Our marriage was on the rocks. Things were very dark. And I'm going to share with you the moment that changed my life, that sent me headlong into the spiritual awakening of a lifetime. I remember laying on the couch up way past my bedtime, and I was exhausted and sick with pregnancy, craning my neck to see the words on my tablet as it was plugged into the wall behind the couch. From Kimberly Clark Sharp's near-death experience. Suddenly, an enormous explosion erupted beneath me, an explosion of light rolling out to the farthest limits of my vision. I was in the center of the light. It blew away everything. It reached the ends of the universe, which I could see, and doubled back on itself in endless layers. I was watching eternity unfold. The light was brighter than hundreds of suns, but it did not hurt my eyes. I had never seen anything as luminous or as golden as this light, and I immediately understood it was entirely composed of love, all directed at me. This wonderful, vibrant love was very personal, as you might describe secular love, but also sacred. Though I had never seen God, I recognized this light as the light of God. But even the word God seemed too small to describe the magnificence of that presence. I was with my Creator, in holy communion with that presence. The light was directed at me and through me. It surrounded me and pierced me. It existed just for me. And when I read those words, it knocked the breath out of me. It knocked me to my knees, because this is exactly what I remembered. This ocean of all-consuming love and light that I remembered but did not understand, let alone know how to put into words like she did, was what I had been searching for my entire life. And as the days went on, I read more and more near-death experiences. I stayed up well into the night after night after night, because I could not get enough, and every single story described the same things. And in the darkest time of my life, I discovered literally the brightest of lights. And I accepted for the first time what I had known in my heart to be true from the time I was born here, but what I had been told I could not believe by one branch of Christianity or another, that God is an infinite ocean of all-consuming love, and that it is His love that is so wonderful and so terrible and so irresistible, because it satisfies and it soothes and it burns and it harmonizes and it purifies and it cleanses and it restores. I can't even begin to describe what this experience was actually like for me. It was like remembering everything that I had already knew. It was like finally being able to breathe, finally giving myself permission to believe what I had wanted to believe, what I had known was true but had been suppressing. It was like all the puzzle pieces of life fit together perfectly, and all of it pointed back to one thing: love. Love the size of a universe. Love making up the universe. Love surrounding me and within me. Love I have never been separated from. People get upset with me sometimes because I can't honestly say that I came to an understanding of Christian Universalism simply by reading the Bible. And I'm not going to say it just to make people happy, because it's not true. At that point in my life, I wasn't even reading my Bible. Reading the Bible had become so painful to me because of the blinders that religion had put on my eyes. It took me going through one of the darkest times of my life, and then having my own memories triggered by reading the stories of others who had encountered God in the same way that I had. I became a Christian Universalist because my heart told me that it was the truth. I remembered it. And then when I read other people's stories, confirming my own memories, it freed me to accept what I had always known was the truth. But what did happen is that after I came to this realization, I opened up my Bible again out of curiosity, and it was like every word on every page had come alive. And all of a sudden, I saw this all-powerful, all-loving God on every page of the book. And it became sacred to me again. I threw away everything that I had been taught about God's hatred, God's weakness, God's inability or refusal to save people. I scrapped it all and I started over. And the center that I started from is God is love. And love is the most powerful and irresistible force in the universe. At this point in my life, I accepted not only the memories that I had been born with, but the spiritually transformative experience that I had around the age of 18 or 19. Again, I have no record of the actual date, so I'm estimating with the ages here. But it was shortly before I left the Calvinistic church. At the time, my mind was too tormented and enslaved to be able to process the information that I was shown. So I suppressed it for many years, even to the point of being afraid of it, thinking that it had been a New Age deception. What had happened is that I had had some sort of an out-of-body experience, although I'm not sure that I actually left my body. Sometimes these experiences are also referred to as near-death-like experiences or spiritually transformative experiences. And I've gone into a lot of detail on this experience before, and I probably will in my next video in this series also, but I will just briefly say now that what happened is my consciousness expanded out of my body, and I had an encounter with the infinite ocean of love and bliss from my memories. And when this happened, it was like waking up from a dream. Now, I was shown many things in this experience, most of which I cannot remember, because they sort of just fell out of my awareness when my consciousness contracted back into my head. Sort of like air leaving a balloon. But what I do remember is that I was shown that what I had been taught in the church was incomplete. That God actually is in control of everything. And it is for that very reason that we can trust that everything will work out for good. His perfect plan allows us to have free will while also at the same time pulling everything back into the center of love. This can be true because God and expressions of God are actually all that exist, and God is love. So even when we think we are choosing the opposite of God, we are choosing something that we perceive and experience as being the opposite of God. But we are actually still choosing God because God is all that exists. In reality, everything is good and everything is progressing exactly as it is supposed to. It is impossible to be eternally lost. What I was actually shown is that it's unthinkable. And suddenly I could see the big picture and I knew. The Calvinists and the Arminians both got it so wrong and so right, because they each only had part of the picture. The Calvinists were right when they said God is in control, and the Arminians were right when they said God wants to save all. He is in control, he wants to save all, he can, and he will. It's so simple and so obvious, it's like we have to brainwash ourselves not to see it. The Arminians were right when they said we do have the power to choose God, we're not totally depraved. And the Calvinists were right when they said God's grace is irresistible. We do have free will, but all there is to choose is God or love. And love does not have to be forced because it is the deepest need of every heart, and ultimately it will be freely chosen. Suddenly, I saw that God is all-powerful, all-loving, all-wise, and all-good. We don't have to choose between God's power and his love because it's all true. God is so much bigger and so much more benevolent and so much more capable and so much more intelligent than we give him credit for. And from this vantage point, I could see the absolute ridiculousness of some of the things that we come up with to believe. The idea that God would create a universe and then either plan for most of it to be lost or lose control of it somehow. Which one of us in our humanity would start something and just plan for it to fail? And yet we think that God would do this, or we think that he's weak enough that the universe that he created would just spin out of his control and he wouldn't be able to help it if people were eternally lost. The idea that God would either be so callous to punish people forever or too weak to stop it. Which one of us would be okay with tormenting somebody forever? And yet we think that God would be? We expect that God somehow expects us to be happy while our loved ones burn forever in hell, to even be able to enjoy heaven while anybody else is being tormented, let alone our friends and family? We know in our heart of hearts that that isn't possible, and yet we somehow project that onto God. Guys, he's so much bigger and better than us. When the Bible says his thoughts are higher than our thoughts, that's because they're actually higher than our thoughts, not lower. Here's the most important takeaway from my story. God can be trusted. I'm not saying that we don't experience suffering in the world or that there isn't suffering or punishment or correction both in this life and in the life to come. What I'm saying is God is so much bigger than all of that. Our vision of him within Christianity is way too small. Just like a parent with a child, God is more than able to handle any darkness or corruption that we could throw at him. The church likes to say God isn't surprised by your sin, but then we turn around and act with our doctrine and theology like he is because he's got to punish us forever for something that he wasn't surprised by. No, God can be trusted, guys. God is safe. God is a safe place. God is comfort and security personified. Anybody who's had any type of supernatural experience of his presence knows this. God is love. Burning, purifying, cleansing love, yes, but love. Anything that he allows to happen is for the ultimate good, not just of the chosen few, of whatever few happen to be in the religious club that you're a part of. No, the good of all, the good of the all in all, everything that he created that is a part of him, that is on a journey back to him. The fact that we haven't been able to see this is just, I don't even have words, guys.